Continuing from our previous discussion on Parmenides in late antiquity, we now delve into Proclus's commentary on Plato's Parmenides. This text is crucial because it tackles a fundamental question. How does Plato portray Parmenides? Is he accurately reflecting the historical figure, or is he perhaps satirizing him? Proclus, a staunch defender of the Neoplatonic tradition, takes a firm stand against interpretations that create conflict where none should exist. So, what's the first point of contention Proclus tackles? Some earlier Platonists argued that Plato's depiction of Parmenides in the dialogue creates a paradox. They pointed to a passage where Plato has Parmenides describe the one as both straight and round. Sounds like a geometric contradiction, right? Like saying a square circle exists. But Proclus pushes back hard. He says this kind of reading just doesn't work. It pits Plato against himself, making Parmenides seem like his own critique, which flies in the face of everything else Plato says about his deep respect for Parmenides. So what's the real issue here? Proclus argues it's simpler than that. They're talking about different ones. Plato, in his dialogue, is denying the spherical form to the ultimate transcendent one. But the historical Parmenides, according to Proclus, was describing the being itself, the single entity that is, and he did indeed attribute a spherical shape to this being. See? No contradiction, just different targets. This leads us directly to another key distinction Proclus emphasizes. It's not just about the one versus being, but also about the difference between truth and opinion. When Parmenides in his poems talks about being, he's discussing this single unified reality. And yes, he uses imagery like spherical to describe its nature. But when Plato's Parmenides denies these attributes to the one, he's talking about the ultimate principle, the source of all things, which is even beyond being itself. Proclus points out that Plato's own second hypothesis actually brings being together with the one, affirming these very same characteristics for this combined concept. So, the resolution isn't that Plato messed up Parmenides. It's that we need to carefully distinguish what Parmenides was talking about in his poems versus what Plato's Parmenides is discussing in the dialogue, particularly distinguishing the highest one from the one being. Okay, let's tackle another apparent paradox. Parmenides says the one being is unmoved, unshaken, remaining in place. Yet he also says intellection happens within being. How can something be both perfectly still and actively thinking? Proclus offers a neat solution. If thinking or intellection occurs within the one being, then surely some kind of activity, some kind of motion, must be happening there too. Think about it. If you're thinking, you're doing something, you're processing information. And life itself involves constant activity. So if intellection implies life, and life implies motion, then the one being must have motion. But wait, Parmenides also calls it unmoved. Proclus resolves this by suggesting that this motion isn't physical movement through space. Instead, it's a higher, perhaps intellectual or spiritual, kind of motion. Since Parmenides described the one being as a sphere, Proclus proposes that this intellectual activity, this intellection, manifests as a spherical motion within that divine sphere. It's like the mind rotating upon itself in perfect contemplation, not like a ball rolling across a table. Proclus continues his defense by addressing the denial of sameness and difference to the one. Again, some might see this as a contradiction if Parmenides himself in his poems seemed to imply that being has internal structure. Proclus clarifies that the historical Parmenides, in his poetic fragments, actually place sameness and difference within the one being. He quotes Fragment 8, "It remains the same, and in the same state it lies by itself." This clearly refers to the being, the single entity. So, when Plato's Parmenides denies these attributes to the one, he's not contradicting the poet Parmenides. He's pointing to an even more fundamental, simpler principle, the ultimate one, which transcends even the structured unity of the one being. It's like saying the universe contains stars and galaxies, same and different things, but the concept of existence itself is beyond such distinctions. This brings us to a crucial distinction highlighted by Proclus regarding the Parmenides in Plato's dialogue. This version of Parmenides takes the argument further, beyond what the poet Parmenides achieved. The dialogue's Parmenides declares that the first principle is not just above all existing things, but above being itself. It's so transcendent that even saying it is in the usual sense is false because it's beyond being. Think of it like this. The poet Parmenides looked at the one being and said, "This is the cause of everything." But Plato's Parmenides takes a step back, looks at that one being, and says actually there's something even higher, something that is only one and is prior to being itself. It's a move towards a more radical metaphysics, pushing the concept of the ultimate reality further away from anything we can easily grasp or even say is in the conventional sense. Now, Proclus gets quite passionate about defending Parmenides' seriousness. He strongly rejects the idea which some had floated, that Plato was simply mocking Parmenides in the dialogue. Imagine Plato dragging the great Parmenides down from contemplating the highest truths into arguments suitable for children. Proclus finds this utterly unacceptable. He argues that Parmenides, despite his focus on the unchanging one being, was still deeply concerned with guiding people, especially the many, to overcome their fragmented view of the world and understand the underlying unity. The challenge, Proclus suggests, is how Parmenides could discuss the highest intelligible reality while also using the language of opinion, like fire and earth. His answer? Parmenides wasn't abandoning the truth for the sake of opinion. Rather, he used the Phaphisia framework of opinion, the world of sensory experience, as a stepping stone, a way to lead people towards understanding the true intelligible reality of the one being before ascending to the even higher truth of the transcendent one. Building on this, Proclus connects Parmenides' thought to the Neoplatonic idea of intellect. Remember Parmenides' famous line, "Conceiving and being are the same thing?" For thinkers like Proclus, this is profound. If thinking and being are identical, and if the highest reality is being, then that reality must also be intellect. Furthermore, since the intelligible heaven, the realm of pure thought, depends on intellect, it follows that the entire cosmos of thought depends on the divinity and unity of this intellect. It's a beautiful symmetry. The structure of reality mirrors the structure of thought, and both are ultimately grounded in that singular divine intellect. Parmenides, in his way, was pointing towards this unity of thought and being. Let's shift gears slightly to Hermias. He makes an interesting observation about the use of allegory. Thinkers like Homer, Orpheus, and yes, Parmenides use symbolic stories involving charioteers and horses. Hermias notes that these poets, being divinely inspired, didn't feel the need to explain their symbols. They were conveying truths directly through inspiration. Later philosophers, however, including Plato, adopted a different approach. While they might also use allegory, they felt a strong need to provide explanations for their symbols. This highlights a perceived shift in philosophical practice from purely inspired revelation to reasoned explanation. Ammonius brings up a fascinating point about time and the divine, drawing connections between Timaeus, Aristotle, and Parmenides. All three agree that among the gods there is no past and no future. Why? Because past and future imply change or the potential for change. But the gods, by definition, are eternal and unchanging. Something that is completely static must logically come before anything that changes. It's the foundation upon which change occurs. Ammonius supports this with Parmenides' own words, for it was not, it will not be, altogether, but it only is. This isn't just about the present moment, it's about the timeless, unchanging nature of intelligible reality, the realm of the gods, where time as we know it doesn't apply. Asclepius provides a clear breakdown of Parmenides' method, focusing on his two main sections or hypotheses. First, he tackles opinion, dealing with the world of sensible things. Here Parmenides hypothesizes that the basic elements are two, fire and earth. Everything we perceive through our senses depends on these. Then Asclepius moves to the second hypothesis, dealing with intelligibles, the realm of pure thought. Here Parmenides posits that what truly is one. This single principle is the source of all intelligible forms. Asclepius even adds a subtle point. When Parmenides says it only is in the intelligible section, he's implicitly valuing fire, what is over earth, what is not. Continuing with Asclepius, he compares Parmenides to Anaxagoras, noting that both introduce powerful causes, mind for Anaxagoras, eros for Parmenides. However, Asclepius clarifies that these aren't final causes in the sense of purpose. Things don't come into being for the sake of mind or eros. Rather, mind and eros are simply good and effective causes that bring things about. Interestingly, Asclepius also argues that Parmenides wasn't a strict monist denying all plurality. How do we know? Because Parmenides himself, when discussing the intelligible one, acknowledges plurality, saying altogether implies knowing about many things. And when he speaks of things being equally poised from the center, that implies there are middles, and therefore extremities, confirming the existence of a plurality even within the intelligible realm. Philoponus offers insights into Parmenides' view of perception and thought. He interprets Parmenides' lines to mean that our mental faculties arise from our sensory experiences and the mixtures or combinations we perceive. Think of it like building blocks. The more accurate or refined your sensory input, the more developed or accurate your thoughts become. More sensation leads to more thought. Importantly, Philoponus stresses that Parmenides wasn't limiting his philosophy to just the physical world. He was using the language of opinion and the sensible world as a tool, a starting point, to ultimately discuss the true nature of intelligible reality. The sensible world is the raw material, but the goal is understanding the intelligible forms. Philoponus also clarifies Parmenides' use of fire and earth. It's easy to misinterpret this as fire being the formal cause and earth the material cause, but Philoponus argues against this. Contraries like fire and earth can't be in that relationship. Instead, Parmenides, according to Philoponus, meant that the more substantial, the more material aspect is what is not earth, while the more refined, the more formal aspect is what is fire. So generation and perishing happen differently for each. The generation of fire is a simple kind of coming to be, while the generation of earth is a particular kind. Similarly for destruction. It's a subtle distinction about how Parmenides conceived of the relationship between matter and form, even in his elemental theory. Olympiodorus and Damascius both touch upon Parmenides' skepticism towards sensory knowledge. Olympiodorus points out that Plato in the Phaedo lists Parmenides alongside Empedocles and Epicharmus as poets who claim that sensation knows nothing accurately. Damascius reinforces this by contrasting these three with others like Protagoras and Epicurus, who believed sensation could be reliable. This highlights a significant strand in early Greek philosophy. The tension between trusting our senses and doubting their reliability, and Parmenides, along with these other pre-Socratics, seems to lean heavily towards the latter view when it comes to achieving true knowledge. Simplicius offers a nuanced take on Parmenides' concept of being. He argues that being isn't as simple as the ultimate one, nor does it reject all forms of plurality. However, it doesn't allow for separation either. Why? Because being is simply one and simply being. Simplicius interprets "for being draws near to being" 4:825 as indicating an internal unity and thus a limit or boundary. If something is complete and has an end, it has a limit. This doesn't contradict the idea of being unlimited in a transcendent sense, but rather defines its immanent structure. Crucially, Simplicius notes that when Parmenides shifts his focus to the world of opinion, the sensible world, he then introduces opposing elements like light and darkness, fire and earth, as the principles governing generation and change there. Finally, Simplicius engages with Aristotle's critique of Parmenides and Melissus. Aristotle accused them of making a mistake by applying arguments about the unchanging intelligible realm to the changing world of generated things. Simplicius, quoting Alexander of Aphrodisias, defends Parmenides. He argues Aristotle misunderstood. Parmenides was indeed investigating the principle of existing things, asserting it was one. He used a logical structure, asking if the principle is one or many, and if one is it moved or unmoved. While Aristotle found the conclusion that all is one and unmoved implausible, Simplicius insists Parmenides clearly separated his account of the intelligible truth from his account of the deceptive appearances of the sensible world. Parmenides wasn't confusing the two realms, he was navigating them, using the intelligible as the standard for judging the sensible. So, what's the big picture here? These testimonies paint a picture of Parmenides that's far more complex and layered than simple caricatures might suggest. The key takeaway is that we need to resist overly simplistic readings, whether it's seeing Plato fighting against Parmenides, or seeing Parmenides as merely a monist. The real depth lies in understanding the distinctions Parmenides himself, and those commenting on him, made, the difference between being and the one, between truth and opinion, between the intelligible and the sensible. Only by grasping these nuances can we begin to appreciate the sophistication of Parmenides' thought and its lasting impact.